There's a ton of fancy, sophisticated ways to work with graphics and slideshows and get very TED Talky with everything. Most of us don't have the resources to pull that off. So what we do instead is we take these graphs and charts that we've already produced for scientific papers or textbooks or posters for classrooms and these sort of things, and we drop them into our PowerPoints. And unfortunately, these are all print products, right? They're built for people who are going to have this stuff in front of them and be able to look at them for several minutes and make sense of them themselves. They're not quite right for public talks, for PowerPoints, for slideshows. We need to translate them a little bit to adapt them to this format where somebody can actually guide you through it, where somebody can animate parts of the graph. So the first thing I like to do is I want to get rid of the title. We've got biodiversity during the Phanerozoic, and I apologize, paleo folks, if I'm mispronouncing that. And I just throw a white rectangle right over it, right? So gone. So I'm not manipulating it in Photoshop or anything. This is just a really quick and dirty way to deal with this within PowerPoint. Do you need the title? I would say no. The title actually competes with the data for attention when you're giving a public talk, and you're there in person. You could say, hey, I'm going to show you this chart. It's biodiversity during the Phanerozoic. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Same thing with the legend. I think the legend competes with the data for attention. You want people looking at the data. You want them to see what's happening with these extinction events and biodiversity. So you want to lose the legend, and then you got to figure out, okay, well, how can I take the elements of the legend and how can I integrate them back onto the chart? Well, the trend line is right in the middle of everything. So you probably just have to point out, hey, that's the trend line. With the labels, though, you can move the labels onto the data itself or right next to the data itself. And something like this, you could probably keep there as long as you're talking about the chart. I actually like to see these things come in and come out so people can understand what the data is showing. Then they can actually look at the data and how it's changing and start engaging with it on that level. Similarly, you can have arrows come in and point out different features if you're dealing with something smaller. This all category up here, this area of data is a little smaller. It's a little bit harder to overlay something on it. So that's when you want to use these arrows, and you probably want them to animate out after you've done saying what they are so you can concentrate back on the data. Now, I picked a fairly complex chart on purpose because we've got all these great little extinction event triangles that are changing the data, right? You want to point out that relationship to folks. So what I've done here is I've just created a bunch more of those little white rectangles, and you can show folks the slide like this, right? And I'll just play you the slide. So here's the chart, and then you can have each of those rectangles disappear, and now you're revealing all the extinction events underneath. And maybe you're talking folks through them over time, right? Here's another one. Let me tell you about this event. It's a very simple technique for just temporarily masking part of the data and then revealing it. It's not obvious where this is in PowerPoint. You have to go to animations, and then you can animate each of your rectangles. And PowerPoint wants you to use all the appear stuff over here. That's what it emphasizes. The exit effects are just this one button here, but once you click on them in the default mode, here's all the fun exit effects you can use. And disappear is the simplest one. It just goes away. There's some other ways to do this, and they often require also getting the axis out of the way. Otherwise, it can look a little distracting, and this will make sense in just a second. So I've taken another white rectangle, covered up that axis. I've embiggened the chart. I got rid of this axis, so this allows me to take up more space on the slide with my data, so I get to show that off a little bit more. You can just do it that way. You can just tell people what the axes are. You can point them out. You can have the axis labels animate in and animate out. Another way that I've seen folks handle this, which is nice, is you have the original chart with the axes and you say what they are, and then you animate the slide to change things up, right? This is a little more complex, but I'll just show you how this looks briefly. Right, it dissolves out, and then the new one dissolves in. And I'll show you that again. Okay, so we've got these axes out of the way, and now we can do a bigger, bolder animation over the whole thing. So this is just another big white rectangle, and this is going to fly out, and now it's revealing the data like that. So this is one of the exit effects. It's the fly out exit effect, and it has a couple options down here. Once you open up the animation pane, it flies out to the right because that's the way the data is moving. And you got to go down here. It advances on a click, and then the duration of the animation is 5 seconds, which is very slow in the default mode. You can actually change that up, and you can make it, as shorter as long as you want. And this could be a really useful way, again, to get the audience's attention on the data, how the data is changing. There's tons of different types of charts that this can work for. Similarly, you can do this with a series of blocks. And because these are flying out to the right, now that I've made this axis narrower, it's easier for folks to look at the data as opposed to this text getting covered up in a way that is kind of blinky. So I'll just animate all these. There you go. And these are all exiting out to the right. And you can see this gets temporarily covered up, and usually nobody notices. It's not distracting because they're focused on the data, right? So this is another way you can animate it. I think these are a bunch of really useful, quick things you can do for these print products that we're trying to move into PowerPoint world. There's a lot of other little things you can do. These are my basic go-tos that I always use when I start with something like this, that you really want to sit down with a cup of coffee and read. And we move it over to, something like this, and then finally something like this, that just really puts the data front and center for the audience and gives you the ability as the presenter to help walk them through that data and help make sense of it. And I really love breaking down charts this way, because what it does is it helps you as the presenter sort of guide the audience along with a sense of discovery about the data itself. And it really takes advantage of the fact that you're in the same room together, and that you have the ability to go over this stuff in person and for folks to get that guidance.